Hello everyone, my name is Ian Scarfe and I am pleased to welcome you to another one of my digital concerts. This one recorded for all my friends at Smith Ranch Homes in San Rafael. I am here in San Francisco in my living room, which has evolved to turn into quite a respectable recording studio and broadcast studio. It has been over 6 weeks since my last public concert, and I dearly miss that part of my life, sharing music with people in person, sharing stories about music, hearing people's reactions, and the honest sound of a little bit of applause after a performance. But nonetheless, today's program features some of my favorite works by Joseph Haydn, George Gershwin, Felix Mendelssohn, and several others. I very much hope you'll enjoy this hour-long program, and if you feel so inspired, you may of course applaud to this video. If you'd like, you can also send me some digital applause. I'll put my email address a couple times during this video. Then perhaps you can send me a little bit of appreciation that way as well. To all my friends at Smith Ranch, I hope you stay happy and healthy, and I hope a little bit of music will help in that regard during these trying times. I look forward to seeing you again in person soon. Thank you and enjoy. All right, the first work on today's program is one of the many wonderful piano sonatas by Franz Joseph Haydn. Haydn was one of the three great figures of the classical era, of a slightly older generation than both Mozart and Beethoven. Haydn's career stretched several decades, and he was able to find quite a bit of success, not only financial success, but popular success in his music as well. The elder Haydn also knew both Mozart and Beethoven when they were young men, and it's amazing to sort of track his musical style as it evolved over the years. Now, this sonata that I'll share with you is his sonata in B minor. It is number 32 of the 50-odd sonatas that Haydn left us. It was composed in the 1770s when all the style in the classical music world, or I should say all the rage, was a style called Sturm und Drang, which is German for storm and stress. And in this time, music, it still had the elegant trappings of what you would expect from classical era music, but it was filled with turbulent emotions. Often stressful minor key pieces were very popular, and indeed that is what we get from Haydn's sonata in B minor. The piece is in 3 movements. The first one you'll hear is a wonderful way of balancing that old style, that early classical, almost Baroque sounding style, with the more modern tendency of Sturm und Drang. In this B minor key, you have a kind of an elegant thing where in my right hand you'll hear Baroque trills against the sort of heavier march of my left hand. And so through this, you have Haydn constantly balancing these two ideas of classical refinement and elegance, and of kind of stormy emotions as well. In the second movement, we have Haydn giving us a little dance called a minuet. A minuet is a typical, elegant, almost royal or courtly dance of this era. And indeed, you can hear in the stately rhythm that kind of formality, if you will. But even the minuet has a darker moment that pops up, darker and more dramatic. The final movement, the third movement, is a presto which skitters along very quickly, and it is filled with nervous energy and little sort of virtuoso frills that run up and down the keyboard. All in all, a very dramatic and wonderful work, filled with little moments of charm and moments of unexpected drama, which I think Haydn did better than anyone. So I hope you enjoy this performance of Haydn's Sonata number 32 in B minor. Next, I'd like to share with you three preludes by the American composer George Gershwin. Now, the tradition of writing little preludes for the piano goes back quite a long time in classical music, all the way back through composers such as Rachmaninoff, Chopin, and Mendelssohn, as far back even as the great Johann Sebastian Bach. Gershwin intended to write a larger set of these, but ended up settling on the three that we have here. They were written and composed in 1926 during the height of what we might call the jazz era in early 20th century New York and United States. Gershwin, as most of us know, was one of the great synthesizers in music. That is to say that even though he grew up in a world infused with jazz and Broadway music, he also had a classical training, and he always sought to sort of bring these two together. Great examples of that include his piano concerto, the one called Rhapsody in Blue, and his second one called the Concerto in F, and other works like his symphonic poem, An American in Paris. These all seem to effortlessly blend classical instruments and classical techniques with the melodies and the rhythms and the feel of jazz and blues music. Now, in these three preludes, you'll hear that the first and the third are the more energetic examples of this. They have very tight, snappy rhythms, and they have lots of jazzy chords along with the recognizable tunes. The second of these preludes, however, is a slower, sort of more kind of lullaby. In fact, Gershwin himself described it as a blues lullaby. So I very much hope that you enjoy these three preludes of George Gershwin. All right, next on today's program, I'd like to share a work by another American composer, Samuel Barber. Barber was born in Pennsylvania and was one of the great American composers of the 20th century. This piece was written in the 1940s, in the early 1940s, which means it came about during the Second World War. This piece is called Four Excursions. I'm going to play one of these excursions for you. Barber said that he intended these short piano works to be excursions into different idioms of American folk music. So just going over the four of them, the first one has a bit of jazz and sort of boogie-woogie almost woven into the texture. The second one is more of a blues piece. The third one is kind of a folk song with perhaps Latin or Central American influences, and the fourth one is kind of like a country square dance. Now the whole set is a wonderful picture of these four different kinds of folk music, but today I wanted to focus on just the first of these excursions. Now, like I said, there is a little bit of a trace to the style of boogie-woogie, and that comes mostly in what you'll hear my left hand doing throughout virtually this entire piece. I'm going to keep a continuous pattern going. It sounds like this. And that will be repeated throughout the piece, like I said, in different harmonies, but that same pattern. And then my right hand will be kind of riffing on top of that, playing lots of blues chords with blue notes like sevenths and thirds. Also several sort of improvisatory swoops up and down, but all held together by that kind of rhythmic bass line. It's a wonderful piece, and as you'll hear, it only hints towards this world of jazz and boogie-woogie. It also has very sort of classical and especially contemporary classical sounds mixed in as well. So it's a wonderful example of, I think, the imagination of Samuel Barber. I hope you enjoy. The next work on the program is one by the German composer Felix Mendelssohn. This is one of many works that Mendelssohn wrote called Songs Without Words. The title, Songs Without Words, implies that here we have something very much in the style of a German lieder, something that could be very easily sung, but instead is entirely realized on the piano, thus Songs Without Words. The challenge for a performer of these works is to balance the weight of the hands, the fingers, so that the vocal melody, the melody which you want to hear as the sung melody, comes clearly to the forefront while the accompanimental notes are in the background. This particular Song Without Words is one of several that Mendelssohn called a barcarolle. A barcarolle is a Venetian boat song that would have been sung by the gondoliers as they pulled their gondolas through the canals of Venice. In it you can hear the rocking rhythm of the water as well as this slightly mournful song of the gondolier who is singing in this particular case. So I very much hope you enjoy this little Song Without Words by Felix Mendelssohn. All right, the next work on the program is by Frederic Chopin. Chopin, the Polish pianist and composer who spent most of his life in Paris, his adult life, in Paris, in France. Chopin, I think, is probably very dear to the hearts of virtually all pianists. Nearly all of Chopin's compositions were written for solo piano, so they are a wonderful thing for me to explore during all of my time here in my home isolation situation here in my living room. This particular piece by Chopin is called Bolero, and for those of you who know anything about classical music, the name Bolero surely brings to mind a different composition, one by the French composer Maurice Ravel. Ravel's Bolero is a wonderful symphonic work that takes a single Spanish-styled melody and repeats it through the whole orchestra in wonderful coloristic effects. This piece is certainly a different experience, but it also has Spanish influences and roots. Chopin wrote this piece basically in 3 different sections. It begins with an introduction. There are some tolling bells you can imagine in these opening chords, and then a scurrying little virtuoso passage for the right hand. That melts away into a little bit of a waltz, but the waltz doesn't find much ground. It moves on quite soon without giving too much. But after that, Chopin takes us into the Bolero proper, which, as you might imagine, is a Spanish style of dance. And in this Bolero, you'll hear that Chopin repeats, again in my left hand, he has a simple rhythmic pattern that'll come again and again. That little rum pa pa pum 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 pum, that will be virtually with us throughout the entire dance of the Bolero. And then on top of that, you have Chopin's typical style of melodic phrasing, which features lots of improvisatory swirls and trills and all that stuff. It really makes for a wonderful little bit of Spanish-style music coming from our dear Polish-French composer, Chopin. I very much hope you enjoy Chopin's Bolero, Opus 19. For the last work on today's program, I wanted to share with you a very famous work by our dear Ludwig van Beethoven. But interestingly, this is a work that was not published during Beethoven's lifetime. Indeed, it didn't come to public knowledge until about 40 years after Beethoven died. The reason for this is that this piece was never meant to be a published work of Beethoven's. Instead, it was a very private and personal gift that he made to someone. Most of us are more familiar with this little Bagatelle by the title, which comes from the inscription that Beethoven put at the top of the page. At the top of the first page of this charming little piece, Beethoven wrote, "For Elise, on the 27th of April, to remember your Beethoven." So, this touching little Bagatelle called Für Elise was originally intended as a gift. We don't really know who Elise was. There are several theories. If you spend a little time on the internet, you can dive right into that and decide what you think for yourself. But in the meanwhile, please enjoy this wonderful little piece of music that shows perhaps a more personal side of Beethoven than we normally hear. I hope you enjoy Beethoven's Für Elise.